For a cup that hot, that's quite chilling.
Buckle down.
So I finally got to see It Follows. Now this was a movie that had been going around and around all the indie circuits, but obviously I couldn't find it anywhere in a theater, and they actually released it locally just now. And at least to say this was a really good horror movie, but it's definitely not one that you're used to. Basically like this, for those of you who didn't like Drive, you're not going to like this movie. And for people who don't, I can understand why, because this movie isn't a traditional horror movie. Not to say that you're stupid for not understanding this movie, but it does require you to think outside the box of this film. I like movies that rely on metaphors and don't super heavy-hand use them, but also use them enough that you can understand what they mean. But at the same time, it leaves it open for interpretation of what these things mean. Because everything the director does in this film means something, and you can tell, like, every bit of imagery, the old TVs, how the food is set up, the items that everyone uses, how people dress, everything in this film means something, and I'd love to re-watch it all and understand everything. I picked up on most of it, but there is a lot of cool stuff in this film. Oh, a little snippet about this film too is you can totally tell it was filmed in Canada at least once because there's French writing on the pool. The premise of this film is that this girl hangs out with this guy, they have sex, then he kind of kidnaps her, ties her to a chair and says, something's gonna follow you. You have to pass it on to someone else by having sex. And what it is, you never really know. It's just a person walking towards you. And you would think that that's not exactly a scary thing, just someone walking towards you, but they make it terrifying. And not with jump scares. Like, there's maybe one jump scare in this movie, but the actual tone of the film is terrifying. Tone is something that horror films don't seem to remember anymore. You don't just need jump scares to scare someone. You need to put them in an environment that people would normally find themselves secure in and then turn it completely on its head and scare the shit out of them. Your home, your street, your school, everywhere you go is terrifying because this thing is following you. And the most interesting thing about this movie is that I think it's an entire giant metaphor for teen pregnancy. Yeah, it is. There's other imagery in this film, especially near the end, that you can totally tell is representing teen pregnancy. It gets pretty interesting. And the direction with the cameras was really interesting too. A lot of zoom-in shots that kind of seem awkward, but they work. A lot of very long panning, rotating shots that, again, seem kind of awkward, but in this film they work. There's a lot of things done in this film that aren't traditional, and it really is interesting. From a filmmaker's perspective, it must have been very interesting to make this film and to have this vision. For drawbacks on this film, it is a little bit heavy on the metaphors sometimes. Sometimes there's stuff that you're just wondering, what does that mean? Especially the plate of food. I keep trying to figure out what the plate of food means. As for the characters, the acting isn't like superb. It's pretty basic. The main character is the same girl from The Guest. So that's kind of cool that she's, getting in these interesting horror films. But for the characters, you're not going to get anyone really groundbreaking in terms of character. There's the stereotype reader, there's the stereotype guy who is in love with a girl but really can't have her, then there's the kind of innocent but slutty girl at the same time. The characters aren't really stereotypes, but they really don't do anything to embellish them or to differentiate them. Like in how Cabin in the Woods poked fun at the fact that how they were the stereotypes of horror films. This film doesn't really do that. It just kind of gives you a stereotype, but not a heavy-handed one, but not one that really breaks any ground. But that doesn't really matter in the end because the horror and the thrills that you get from this film are quite good, and the soundtrack, the soundtrack is so awesome. It's like a horror rendition of old 80s synthesizer music. It is so cool. And it's so awkward at times, too, because sometimes the music just goes... And you don't really know why, but you're digging it. At least I was. So for my final rating of this film, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 7. I give it mad props for being original and for really making you think outside the box, but not too heavy-handedly. The atmosphere in this film is fan-frickin-tastic. It's about time a horror movie delivered an atmosphere that was terrifying. Sure, the characters are a little weak here and there, but the overall product of this film is so cool. I want to rewatch this movie not just for the story, but to actually look over and analyze every part of the film to see what everything means. I really want to know what the food meant. Anyway, guys, it's playoff season, so you better be cheering for the best team this one. And I'll see you guys later.
Buckle down.